I started to clean up the garden a little bit this morning because I knew I was going to be filming this, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to keep it as is and show you what my garden normally looks like on a regular basis. And I want it to be as applicable to your gardens as much as possible. I also thought that I could address some of the issues that I'm having, and hopefully that might help you out if you're having the same issues. Starting with my blackberries, I have 3 different varieties. These are all thornless varieties, and I got them through Indiana Berry Company. So this first one is a Ponca. It is an erect variety. It was my best tasting blackberry last year. It wasn't my best producing though, but I'm hoping this year will be a little bit better. I have had some issues with some canes dying. These were the flora canes, which is kind of a bummer because these are the ones that were going to be producing fruit. However, I have left them up because I noticed some holes born into the very end of them, which tells me that they're probably some solitary bees that have nested in or laid eggs inside. And these solitary bees are really important pollinators for early spring fruit like blackberries. So I'm going to leave these alone, or if I do prune them down, I'm going to prune them at the very bottom and just kind of lay them underneath so they're protected. And hopefully when they emerge next spring, they will help pollinate these blackberries. This second variety is my best producing, probably my second best in flavor. This is Natchez, and it's a semi-erect variety. So as these new primocanes get larger, I'm going to be tying them to the support lines. But as you can see, it has a ton of fruit and it's producing lots of new canes. So this is definitely a heavy producing variety. This third variety is Washita. It's a semi-trailing, and it didn't do great for me last year, although it wasn't. It's only its second year. All of these are in their second year. But this year it is doing great. These canes are insane. It has tons of fruit, so I'm really excited to see how this one does this year. Next, I have my pollinator garden, and a lot of these were grown from seed. Most of these are perennials, and a lot of these are native perennials to my area. And my goal for this garden was to have obviously a space that the pollinators could enjoy. I don't do any sort of treatment in this garden whatsoever. And I also wanted to have things blooming from early spring to late fall. In this first section, I have some Canterbury bells. I grew these from seed. This is in their second year, so they are blooming for the first time, and I am just loving these. They are such gorgeous blooms. I'm hoping they do okay in the heat of our summers, as they don't really like heat. I did lose one when I planted them originally, but so far so good. They have this gorgeous purple color. Really excited for these. I have some rose campion. I have another one that I'll show you in a minute that is actually blooming. I have some English daisies that are super cute. I actually grew these during a winter sowing project this past winter, and they're blooming in their first season. I have some black-eyed Susans, some salvia, and then in the back I have some rose mallow hibiscus. Next, I have some daffodils that are pretty much done for the season. I've braided up the leaves and pruned off the flower stalks. You want to leave these leaves until they turn brown, because this is how the plant is making and storing energy for the following season. And then what I usually do is I'll plant some sort of annual just over top these after I prune them down. I'll probably go with borage this year because the bees really enjoy it. I have some autumn joy sedum that the rabbits have been enjoying. That's okay. It'll have time to recover before it puts out blooms this fall. And then I also have some king white delphinium. This is actually an annual, but it reseeds itself so readily. I actually transferred this over from my raised bed garden because it had just reseeded and grown a ton this spring. So hopefully this will keep coming back year after year. And in the back, I have bee balm. This is a great one to plant in a pollinator garden. It produces these gorgeous, really fragrant purple blossoms that live up to its name because the bees absolutely love it. Here in the front and sort of center, I have a lot of my low growing spreading plants. So I have some creeping jenny, some phlox, some dianthus. I have a bachelor's button that actually came back this year. It was supposed to be an annual, but it survived. I have some more dianthus and one English daisy. All of these I grew in my winter sowing project, so I'm not sure if they'll bloom this year. They might in the following year. And then the most important plant I have in my pollinator garden is this butterfly weed. This is a milkweed, and milkweed is the food source for monarch caterpillars. So you plant this with the hopes that it will be eaten every year. It's a gorgeous orange color, this butterfly weed. There's other varieties like swamp milkweed that bloom purpley pink, but you want to make sure you plant a variety that is native to your area. So here's an example of something that is not going well in my garden. Everybody has that one plant that they struggle to grow. Mine is climbing roses. I have tried every which way I know to grow these in good soil and poor soil. I've had soil testing done. I've done different fertilizers, and I've just had no luck. So these are Claire Austin. They're David Austin climbing roses. And this one has done okay, but I've had not one, but 2 die on this side. I had a mole come through, and then another one just didn't ever take. And this one, although it looks somewhat healthy, I'm battling a fungus on it. It's really affecting the blooms, so they're getting a lot of splotchiness and they're falling off. So I haven't decided if I'm going to keep this or not. I may just have to try out some sort of other climbing plant. And on this other side of my garden, I have some sweet alyssum that the pollinators are loving. I have some mums that will bloom really beautiful this fall. I have a balloon flower that I wasn't sure if it's going to come back. It's still pretty small, but they make these really pretty balloon kind of shaped blossoms. I have some more phlox, creeping jenny. I have some more black-eyed Susans, and then behind that I have purple coneflower echinacea, which is another native one to my area. They get these big, beautiful purple blossoms. Behind that I have some Shasta daisies, and then I have some columbine that is pretty much done blooming, but I'm waiting for these seed pods to dry so I can save some seeds. I have some Shirley Temple peonies that I just pruned. They were really, really gorgeous this year. In this front, I actually just pruned down all of my hyacinth, which is one of my earliest blooming plants in the spring. And again, I'll probably put some sort of flowering annual over the top of it. I have more white hibiscus in the back, and then behind I actually have some hollyhocks. I have one that is going to bloom hopefully for the first time this year, and then I have two other ones that I grew from seed planted over in the corner, so I'm not sure if they will bloom this year. And then tucked behind, it's hard to see from here, but I have some celosia. I've tried this in the past. It doesn't really like this spot very much. I'm going to try it one more year, because once these peonies and columbine get cut down, I like having a pop of color in the front of that, but I'm not sure if they like this spot or not. And then I also have some lupin that I've grown from seed. I grew it, 2 years ago. I added some more this year. I don't know if it's going to bloom this year. Sometimes these perennials, when they're grown from seed, can take a few years to produce flowers. So if not this year, then hopefully next year. Moving on to my raspberries, and again, all of these raspberries came from Indiana Berry Company. This first one is Killarney. It did really well for me last year. These are in their 3rd year. It sent up a ton of new primocanes, and I'll have quite a bit of harvest on the floricanes this year. Next, I have Bristol black raspberries. These did really well last year. They're going to do well again this year. I think black raspberries have a very kind of specific taste. So I think for a black raspberry, this is a really, really good type. It's just kind of an acquired taste, whether you like them or not. Now, some people say that you shouldn't do black raspberries next to other kinds of fruit because they do tend to harbor disease more so than other varieties. However, I have not found that to be an issue. I've done a pretty good job of pruning them. If I see any issues, like a fungal issue, I treat them right away with a copper fungicide. So I have not had issues planting them in between, but just something to consider if you plan on planting black raspberries. And next I have my fall raspberries, or primocane bearing raspberries, which means these bear fruit on those new canes they shoot up every year. So at the beginning of late winter, early spring, I will prune these completely down to the ground. They will send up obviously tons of new shoots, and they will bear fruit on those canes. So I have a crimson night, which is a really, really deep red color. It's super, super sweet. And then over here I have double fall gold, really beautiful, kind of pinky, yellowy, orangish color. Very, very sweet, but not quite as sweet as that crimson night. Next, I have 4 blueberry plants. Now, blueberries grow well in my area as far as climate is concerned. However, we have naturally very alkaline soil in my area because of all the limestone, and blueberries prefer very acidic soil, 4.5 to 5.5 on that pH scale. So along with soil testing regularly, I have to almost constantly amend the soil with sulfur to keep that pH where those blueberries like it. This first one is a Brightwell rabbit eye. So a rabbit eye is a specific type of blueberry. Now I'm trying with just one. Rabbit eye varieties actually do better when there's more than one planted. So if this isn't pollinating well and I'm not getting a lot of fruit in the next year or two, I'm going to plant another one as a companion plant. You can see though, raspberries, how aggressive they are. I have raspberries tunneling over from this bed into this one, so I'm going to have to get in and really dig those out so they're not competing with nutrients. I'm also having a little bit of issue. This browning of the leaves is sun scald, which tells me that I need to be watering these just a little bit more. This next variety is a pink lemonade, so it produces these really pretty pink blueberries, and this one, along with the rabbit eye, I purchased last year. And these are probably 3 to 4 year old plants, so they should hopefully start producing really well this year, if not next year. And in between my blueberries, because these are still fairly young and small, I like to kind of just put some plants in for beauty and for possibly helping with pollination. So I have some balsam camellia kind of tucked in between these two plants. Now these two are my big producers. They're probably about 5 to 6 years old. I had them in containers for their first 3 years. I moved them into the ground last year and they're doing really well. They adapted well. I honestly have no idea what this one is. I bought it as a clearance plant at the end of the season, again, like 6 or 7 years ago, completely lost the tag. I have no idea what it is. I wish I did because it's probably my best producing and best tasting blueberry. And then this one is a sunshine blueberry. I believe it's a dwarf variety, so I don't think it'll get much bigger than this. But again, they have so much fruit on them this year. And one thing I just noticed too is I like to mulch these with compost. Not only does it help keep the soil a little bit cooler, it helps suppress weed growth, which I have a ton going on right now. And it also slowly breaks down and feed the plants. So adding onto my to-do list that's already like a mile long, I'm going to be adding some more compost to this blueberry section. So now let's head over to the raised bed garden. This is my only metal raised bed. I'm trying it out for the first time this year. So this is the Gardening in Minutes metal raised bed with gardening grid system. And any of the products that I talk about today, I'll link below, as well as the sites to the places where I ordered my plants. But this is a really cool watering system. There's not one inch of this bed that is not watered, and it waters at the base, so it's a really, really good setup. And in it, I have a black cherry, a sweet 100 cherry, I have purple celosia, I have some ground cherries, ornamental basil, and then I just kind of tuck extra flowers that I've had. So I think I have a French marigold, I have an amaranth that I don't think is going to make it, and I also have some, it's either statice or satis flowers, but I'm really excited to see how this turns out. Here is a brand new in-ground bed. We just installed it this spring, although we started amending the soil this past fall, and we did this to grow larger things like corn or pumpkins or melons. So we amended the soil, and then we also edged it with this metal edging from Edge Right, which has made it really easy to trim around. The corn that I planted, however, hasn't done really great. I only had about 40% germinate, and that could be from a couple reasons. One, I know for sure that the birds got to some of the seed. Two, it could be that the seeds dried out while they were germinating. I don't think that's what happened, as I did a pretty good job of keeping the ground moist, but it could be a possibility. The third is that the seed just wasn't that great. So I have ordered more because I really need all of these plants to grow. With corn, you have to have kind of a certain amount to make sure that it pollinates and grows really well. So I'm hoping with the second round of seeding that I'll have a much better crop growing in here. In these first two beds, I have quite a bit of a mix, and this is something that I'm trying new this year. Instead of planting a whole bed full of one crop and another bed full of another, I'm trying to mix things up in the hopes that this will help deter some of the pests. It kind of confuses the scent, especially for those pests that are looking for particular plants. And then I've interplanted a lot of flowering plants and a lot of herbs to try to help with that natural pest control as well. So in this bed, I have German hardneck garlic. It is probably within a few weeks of being ready to harvest. I just pulled off all the scapes, which tells me usually for me it's about 2 to 3 weeks after those scapes are formed that this will be ready. And I'll just wait until about half of the leaves have turned brown before I harvest. When this comes out, I will probably put in bush beans. On this side, I have Alaska peas that are actually doing really well. Peas are kind of hit or miss in the spring for me. It just depends on how quickly our temps warm up. But what's nice is that I have some lettuce planted on the north side of these peas. So it's done a really good job of shading this lettuce, and so it's helped this lettuce have a little bit of an extended harvest by keeping it cooler. So I have green salad bowl lettuce and I have Easy Park MTO lettuce. Then in the back of this bed, I have I believe this is another black cherry. Yeah, black cherry tomato. I have an nasturtium that I'm using not only for pollinators with the beautiful flowers, it's a great trap crop for things like aphids that might affect the tomato. And then the leaves are also edible. So that's kind of a good kind of multi-purpose plant. I have some dill that again is doing really well because it's partially shaded by these peas. I have some Katrina peas, and these are more of a dwarf variety, so they are ready for harvest a lot sooner. And if you don't have a really tall trellis, these are a good variety to plant because they don't get really tall. I have a volunteer potato. I always think I've dug up all the potatoes and it never fails that I miss one. I'm pretty sure this is a russet potato because of where it was planted. I wasn't planning on growing this variety again, but I kind of have a rule in my garden, if you volunteer yourself, then you get to survive. So here I have an orange jazz tomato. This is a new variety from Harris Seeds that I'm trying out this year. It's supposed to have a little bit of a peachy kind of flavor to it. And then again, I'm working on interplanting some different vegetables. So these are onions. and they have a really strong scent, which is thought to help deter some pests. So it should be a good thing to plant between these tomatoes and helping with some natural pest control. On this side of the bed with the peas, I have some ranunculus that is in desperate need of deadheading. I am notorious for planting cut flowers and then never actually cutting them to use in arrangements. But this was really gorgeous this year. I planted it last year, harvested the corms as they won't survive our winter. They did really well in storage, planted them in early spring after pre-sprouting them, and they have just done really well. So they probably have a few more weeks after I've deadheaded all the flowers and the leaves start to turn brown. I'll harvest those corms, dry them, store them, and then they'll be ready to plant next year. And this giant bed, this is a bed that we actually just redid. You can see the new wood. I have a whole bunch of different things. So again, I like to plant herbs that will flower because they're really good at attracting pollinators. So this is some cilantro that has bolted, and we'll get these really pretty little flowers on top. I have some basil. I like to plant that in between my tomatoes. It's thought to help deter hornworm. I've had mixed results with it, but the bees really love the flowers, and of course I just really love basil. I have a couple tomatoes planted here. I have a Buffalo Sun. I think both of these are Buffalo Sun. This is another new variety from Harris Seeds I'm trying out this year. I have some green onions that I overwintered. Onions are biennial, so in their second year they will produce seed. So I am letting it flower to collect and save some seed. I have a ton of dahlias planted in this bed from tubers that I saved over the winter. And again, I've just interplanted some French marigolds, which are one of my favorite companion plants. They're low growing. The Japanese beetles leave them alone and they're really beautiful. Have some more dill. In this section of the bed, again, I have some of those onions planted to kind of help deter some pests. I have some green machine zucchini. I have a nasturtium and a big beef tomato that aren't doing well. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. This kind of little section of the bed was brand new because we extended the bed, and so this soil is brand new, and it could just be that that soil doesn't have a lot of life in it, or maybe the plants just don't like the mix. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit of experimenting to see what's going on here. But more cilantro, and then this is a brand new cattle panel trellis we installed, and so I'm gonna grow cucumbers up this. So these are Sassy Cuke F1s. They are from Harris Seed and they're a pickling variety, so these are gonna grow up on this side and some more dill there. And then in this area, I have some more French marigolds, I have some more onions, I have a couple different varieties of cabbage that the birds have absolutely been decimating this year. I've had to cover them so many times, but I have a Katrina cabbage, a Caraflex, and a ruby ball cabbage. And then again, I have more cucumbers planted on this side, and these will grow up this trellis. These are, let me check. These are silver slicers, so they're a really cool white variety of cucumber. It's a slicing cucumber. So these will grow up and over this trellis here. This was my lettuce bed that is pretty much done. In fact, I'm letting it bolt to try to collect some seeds. So I had some spinach here that is going to seed. I had some butter crunch lettuce, some white Paris, some Marciano lettuce, which is this really beautiful purple color. And then I had some arugula over there. Those are those gorgeous little white flowers. So again, lettuce is an annual, so it will bolt, which means it's gonna get really bitter in taste. But the good thing is it will send up a flower stalk, and if they get pollinated, you can collect some seed. Let me show you one of the things I do to help extend my lettuce harvest, because we sometimes have very short springs. So this is shade cloth, and you want to add this before the weather starts to get really, really warm. And I will usually get maybe another 2, maybe 3 weeks of lettuce using this shade cloth. This is my main onion bed, and onions are probably definitely top 3 my favorite vegetable to grow. They're so fun to grow and to harvest. These are all bulbing onions, and I have a couple tried and true varieties, and then I have a couple new ones. So I'm growing Bridger and Alyssa Craig. Those are onions I've grown before. They do really well. They store pretty well for me. And then I'm also trying out some Tannet or Tannat, I'm not sure how you say it, and some blush onions this year as well. This is a spring vegetable bed, and most of this is going to be pulled to make way for some peppers. So I have some blue Scotch curled kale. This is one of my favorite varieties of kale. It freezes really well. I have some white globe turnips that will be ready for harvest soon. And then I have 3 different varieties of radishes. I have a white icicle, a Chinese breakfast radish, French breakfast radish, and an early globe radish. But however, you can see the flowers on these, they're really beautiful. And as they get pollinated, they'll produce these pods that are also supposed to be very delicious. So some of these I will leave in to produce those pods. And then I have some rainbow chard. This will probably, it's fairly heat tolerant, so this one will probably stay in a little bit longer. And then, like I said, I have some peppers that are going to be going in here. And I also have some onions planted on either end to, again, help with that pest control. And in this oddly shaped bed in the back of my raised bed garden, I usually reserve for flowers. So I do have 2 lavender plants. This one I grew from seed, so it's just starting to bloom this year. I have some bells of Ireland that are doing okay in the front. They prefer that cooler weather, and the weather's getting a bit warm for them. I'm hoping they'll produce these stalks before the weather gets too hot, but they're really beautiful cut flower. They make a good filler in arrangements. And then I have 3 Tithonia. These are Mexican sunflowers, and they're one of my favorite flowering annuals to plant. They give big, beautiful orange blossoms that butterflies and bees absolutely love. They get fairly big. This variety does about 3 by 3 for me. So if you have room in your garden, I absolutely recommend these. They produce a ton of seed that you can save and then grow them again year after year. And then I have a couple 30-gallon grow bags that I'm growing sweet potatoes in this year. I've done this before and they did pretty well. I have 2 right now. I'm going to be adding a few more grow bags to the garden. But I usually put 3 plants in a 30-gallon grow bag. And then what's nice is as they start to flower, they'll kind of climb up my completely covered fence right now. It's so dirty from all these birds trying to get to the garden, but they'll flower and the vines will climb and produce these really pretty purple flowers. So it makes a nice backdrop to the garden. And this is my perennial herb bed, and I have some thyme and oregano mostly in this bed as they grow huge. They definitely need to be cut back, but I do have some cilantro that is bolted. I'll probably go ahead and just pull this. I mainly planted it to harvest the cilantro. Moving on, in this bed I have some sugar snap peas, and when these are done I will plant some more slicing cucumbers. I have some more nasturtium, some more bulbing onions. I have some 2 carbon tomatoes, a German striped tomato, and then in between these tomatoes I've interplanted some chamomile. I'm really excited to make some homemade chamomile tea this year. And then these right here are parsnips. I'm really excited. I've never been able to get these to grow before, so I had about half of what I planted germinate. I'm going to try to plant a few more even though it's getting a little bit warm. These are long season, so they'll grow all summer long into the fall and hopefully be ready to harvest this fall. On this side of the bed, I have mostly potatoes, and I prefer to grow early season potatoes. The longer season potatoes, it just honestly gets too hot here in the summer and they tend to suffer. So I plant early season. They'll be done by about mid-June. I pull them and then I can do a second crop come fall. So I have Yukon Gold, I have Red Cloud, and I have Caribe potatoes. And then I also have some kale that overwintered. I cut it down to the base last year, thought I was just gonna be done, but it actually came back, survived the winter and came back. And kale is biennial, so it'll flower in the following year. And it's been pollinated really well, and it's starting to produce these seed pods, which is really cool because then I'll be able to save some seed. And then on this side of the bed, I have another German striped tomato. I have an Old World German tomato, and this is a Sugar Rush hot peach pepper I actually grew last season. And peppers are perennial, but a lot of times they won't survive our winters. So I actually trimmed this down. You can see where I trimmed it, dug it up, put it in some potting soil, and just kind of stuck it in an out of the way place in my basement. It stayed dormant for most of the winter and started to put out some new growth this spring. Once the frost had passed, I planted it again in the garden. It's putting out a ton of new growth and already producing peppers. So this is a great way to get peppers a lot earlier, as my other ones I grew from seed this year aren't even planted yet. So if you have a pepper that's doing really well this year and it's maybe a variety that's harder to find, instead of throwing it out, dig it up, put it in a pot inside. Some store better than others. I like to experiment, but this is a really good way to save your peppers year after year. And then I also have some more nasturtium. I have some dwarf cosmos tucked in, and then on this side of the cattle panel trellis, I have some double yield pickling cucumbers that'll grow up and over. And then I have some honeydew melon growing from seed under my grow lights right now. And what I like to do with melon is I like to use it as a living mulch. So the honeydew melon will kind of grow in between a lot of these taller plants, especially the tomatoes and the chamomile and the pepper. And it will help shade the soil and also give you a little bit more space. Just really quickly about my watering system. All of these beds are watered by soaker hoses, and I have them on a timer. And I kind of have it set up in zones where I can water multiple zones at once, and then I just have to move the hoses to different zones each day. Now, I've done a whole video about my setup, so if you're curious to see how I water this huge garden, then I will link that video below. We recently did a patio expansion, so it's still kind of a mess as we figure out how we want to decorate it. But I did want to show you a few of the container plants that I have. Now, all of my citrus trees I grow in containers because they won't survive our winters here in 6B. So I have a Meyer Lemon. I got this one last year. It had spider mites on it quite a bit over the winter. I brought it out, sprayed it down with some organic insecticide. I used the pyrethrin spray, which you only want to use if you don't have any kind of blossoms on the plant, as it's pretty toxic to pollinators. But since I don't, I felt comfortable using it, and it's starting to put out lots of new growth. This is another new plant I got last year. This is a brown turkey fig. Now, figs are kind of right on the border of being hardy for our zone, but I went ahead and put it in a pot, and then over the winter, I didn't take it inside, but I did push it up against the house near the brick because that brick will give off a little bit of heat, and it did just fine. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that I'll get some fruit on it this year. Here I have a Calathea Orange tree. I've had this one for probably 6 or 7 years. It does pretty well producing fruit, and my favorite part is the orange blossoms. They smell amazing. I can smell them all the way across the yard when it blooms. And this is a brand new oleander tree. It was given to me by a friend. It bloomed once really early this spring. I pruned it back, transplanted it to a larger pot, and it's starting to bloom again. And then over here I have some sweet mint in a pot. I feel like most people know this, but you always want to plant mint in a pot as it's super aggressive and spreads like crazy. And then I have a plumeria. I've gone back and forth whether I'm going to keep this plant or not because it practically doubles in size every year, and eventually I'm going to have a hard time getting it inside. But it produces the most gorgeous yellow and white blossoms that are super, super sweet smelling. So for right now, it's staying. And then here I have mostly an annual herb station. I like having it on the patio where I can come out and grab some herbs really quickly for cooking. I do have rosemary, which is a tender perennial in my area, so I keep it in a pot so I can bring it up or even inside the house over the winter. And then in this raised bed garden, I have some dill, I have some cilantro, I have some curled leaf parsley, and I have some sweet basil. And this is my tower garden. It's an aeroponic garden, and I grow tomatoes in it every year. My favorite is to grow Roma because they're a determinate tomato, so they don't get very, very big, which is great for this. But because it's constantly or on a timer being watered, these tomatoes always grow really, really well. And then this year I actually tried a few other things up top earlier this spring. So I did some butter crunch lettuce and some flat leaf parsley. I'm gonna have to wrap it up because I'm having to compete with some lawnmowers, and that's okay. Last but not least, I have my ginger, and this is my first year growing ginger. I was so excited. I just bought organic ginger root from the grocery store, planted it, it sent up shoots, it looked great. And then when I moved it outside, I don't know if I exposed it to too much sun too fast or if it just didn't like the spot that I had it in. It was getting too much sun, but the stalks that I had here just completely got burned up. So I went ahead and pruned them down. This one's still doing okay. It's putting out new growth, but the roots are still intact, and in fact they're starting to send up some new shoots. So I'm hoping my first go with ginger won't be a complete failure. Thanks so much for joining me on this late spring, early summer garden tour. Be sure to check back. I'll do another tour later this summer as I have different plants growing. If I mentioned any websites or any products, I will link them in the description box below if you are interested. And don't forget to follow me on my other social media channels where I post easy to follow short form videos geared towards beginner gardeners. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.